And then when they mapped my veins a couple of nights before, and they see exactly where the veins were at, I could see them. I watched them map them. So that I thought, man, I'm gone.
3.5 months ago, Thomas Creech narrowly avoided death after a death warrant was signed. Idaho's longest-serving death row inmate was supposed to be executed in February, but after 8 attempts, an Idaho Department of Correction medical team was not able to get an IV into him.
Creech and his wife reached out to me recently. He wanted to finally share why he believes he dodged the state-sponsored execution and what it was like. A judge sentenced Creech to death in the early 80s, saying Creech, quote, intends to keep on killing and can't be stopped. Decades later, Creech says he wants people to see he's a changed man. Around 10 o'clock in the morning on February 28th,
I fully believed that I'm going to die.
Thomas Creech expected to take his final breath.
I had convinced myself that that was it. So they came in to the death cell, handcuffed me, strapped me to the board, and then they put me on a gurney and they wheeled me in to the execution room. They started adjusting my hands and legs to strap me down. And then the warden told them to go ahead and proceed with the execution. I looked over to the right and I saw my wife sitting there. She had the most devastating, horrible, terrorized look on her face that I have ever seen in my life.
His wife, Leanne, was crying, sitting next to his priest. His son was there. Creech says he looked mad.
They started in my right arm, up by my elbow, and that was the first place that they poked me. I could feel it.
Creech remembers a total of 10 attempts, but IDOC says they tried and failed 8 times to establish an IV line where they'd inject pentobarbital into Creech's veins.
I don't know if it was wishful thinking or I actually saw it, but I thought I saw angels standing on each side of my bed. And I think I started crying, and I pointed up to the sky and told my wife I was sorry.
Creech tells me his veins collapsed, meaning the veins' walls squeezed shut, preventing blood from flowing through. Just under an hour later, at 10:58 a.m., IDOC leaders announced they were halting the execution.
What they encountered in some instances was an access issue, but in others where they could establish access, they were unable. It was a vein quality issue that made them not confident in their ability to administer chemicals through the IV site once established.
My thought was just a divine intervention. It's the only thing I could think of. Otherwise, I would have been dead. I believe it was God Almighty that had his hand in it, that stopped it.
The Department of Corrections medical team, escort team, and incident command staff trained for and rehearsed his execution multiple times. Although Creech says they never practiced on him. IDOC requires medical team members taking part in an execution place IV catheters in established drips and at least 2 volunteers within the year leading up to the execution. And in the 2 days prior to the execution, they have to take part in at least 4 training sessions and 2 rehearsals.
Because when I was in the death house for that 30 days before the execution, every 2 or 3 days they would take me down to medical and they would practice doing the execution. They would go back and forth into the room and have somebody act like they were me.
Medical staff even mapped out his veins in the days leading up to the execution. But he says IDOC knew it was a challenge to get needles in his veins.
You have bad veins. Like, this is something that IDOC knew, and this is a health issue you have, correct?
They've known this forever. Even when they did blood draws on me for diabetes and stuff, they had a hard time accessing the veins. So my attorneys had warned them about this, but apparently they didn't take it to heart.
Since the failed execution,
it's really bad.
Creech says his health deteriorated.
Some days I'm not even sure if I'm going to live to the next day. I continue to have the nightmares. one of the dreams I have is I wake up and I'm back on that table again. And they're sitting around me, putting the needles in it. And then the other one that really terrorizes me is I go into that room and it's my wife that's on the table and not me.
His death warrant expired that night, and a new warrant hasn't been issued.
When you're under the death penalty, not knowing from one day to the next if you're going to get a death warrant or not, it's really bad. I mean, it plays on your mind every day. Like I said, I'm no saint, but I feel bad. As bad as a person can possibly feel.
Creech and I talked about the murders he committed back in the 70s, the ones that first landed him in prison and got him his first death sentence in Idaho. He explained why he killed fellow inmate David Dale Jensen in 1981 and the remorse that he says he feels over it now. You'll hear how he's reflecting on the decisions he made and what could be ahead for him tomorrow on the news at 10.
Okay, so we've been seeing some of these messages come in throughout the day today, during these promotions and even from the 208, that people are wondering why we're giving this attention. Why we're giving a death row inmate who is guilty of this, sentenced to die, the airtime. To talk about his feelings and his remorse.
I think it's fair. It's a very fair critique. And we've also seen text messages from people saying, what about the victims, right? Talk to the victims' families. And I will say I did speak to a family member of one of the victims, Tanya Wyrick. She didn't want to go on camera, but she did provide me a statement. I included that in the story that's airing tomorrow night here on the news at 10. I will say, though, right after the execution failed, our Abby Davis did interview her. So you can find that interview that Abby did with Tanya on our YouTube channel. But going back to your question about the reason we wanted to speak with Creech, this was an unprecedented event in the state's history. Only a handful of people in the entire nation have ever survived a state-sponsored execution. This was something paid for by taxpayers, and we wanted to hear in his own words what that experience was like. Yeah,
and I think there's value in that, the interest in kind of the unique perspective of avoiding that and being in that chamber and hearing it from his own words, how he describes that. Yeah, there's value in that.
Yeah, and him reflecting on the crimes that he committed. And again, like I said, he says he's remorseful. He says he's a changed man. So tune into that story tomorrow night on the news at 10.